Is it, can you see it? Okay. So I guess I'll just start. So hi everyone. Today I'll be talking to you a bit more about my research study. It's titled Sweater Season: Planetary Urbanization Through the Seasonal Migration of the Itinerant Tibetan Sweater Trade. So the seasonal sweater business is basically regarded as the main source of income for Tibetans in India. So almost all households are involved in it, and it has played quite a significant role in raising the livelihoods of Tibetans in India since the 1960s, from poverty-like conditions to relatively comfortable lifestyles. So this study explores how the seasonal Tibetan sweater migration influences and contributes to planetary urbanization, which is like a contemporary theory in urban studies about how the entire world is getting urbanized. And I'll touch more on this later. So as we are familiar, in 1959, the Dalai Lama escaped Tibet to Dharamshala, where he set up his government in exile. And this spurred an exodus of Tibetan refugees into India and Nepal. So the Tibetans in India particularly were allowed to stay in refugee settlements allocated for them, which initially were subsistence-based rural communities with little chance of interaction with the local Indian society or a chance to earn an income of their own. So the Tibetan sweater business started out by a few entrepreneurial Tibetans going from village to village, selling handmade sweaters to the locals for extra income. But this has since evolved into a widespread and quite a normative practice across all Tibetans in India. So the trade now centers around seasonal migration to the cities every year to sell mass-produced winter clothing during the winter. So a bit more about the process of this trade. So each Tibetan refugee sweater market is run by a market community, formed and elected by the traders within the market itself. So the first part of the season, around August or September, the community will send like an advance party to the cities to acquire the permits from the local government to allow them to set up the markets for the year. So this process is usually quite a smooth process because it's been done for decades already. And once that's done around October, the individual traders from the different settlements in India will make a trip down to the wholesalers to purchase their stock in bulk for the season. So the wholesalers are mostly located in Ludhiana or Delhi, and the journey there can take a few days, and it's usually by train. So the sweater business is kind of a norm by now. So the local Indian suppliers and the Tibetan traders are on very good terms. And usually the suppliers will allow the Tibetans to purchase the stock on credit. So the stock gets sent to the marketplaces all over India through transport companies available in Ludhiana and Delhi. So it's quite like an established ecosystem already. So for the second part of the season, when the winter starts around November or December, the traders will make a trip down to the marketplace and they will set up and stay in shared rental housing for the rest of the season. So during the season itself, the traders have to work really hard and long hours every day to make sure that they earn enough for the year. Because what they earn during the winter will have to last them for the rest of the year. And finally, for the third part and the last part, at the end of the season, around February, the traders will dismantle the stalls and the marketplace and they will go back home to their respective settlements. So over here, we have India. And yeah, and in India, here are some of the locations that my interviewees are based in. So firstly, the white dots represent the settlements that my interviewees and many Tibetan sweater sellers are from. They are all usually located in rural and quite remote parts of India. And here are some photos that are sent to me by my interviewee of his settlement in Kollegal, which is in Karnataka, the white dot at the bottom. So the red dots on the map represent the wholesalers that the traders usually will visit. And the one that's the most popular is usually Ludhiana. This is Ludhiana. So this is the place where most Tibetan traders from all over India go to Ludhiana to get their stock every year. And finally, the blue dots represent the cities that the sweater markets, that the traders travel to every year, and the cities where they stay in for the season. So these places are very rural. These places are like urban settings that are very different from their rural home environments. And here's an idea of what a typical sweater market looks like. So in this paper, I explore like the gradual urbanization of the rural home communities of the Tibetan sweater settlers in India. And this gradual urbanization is caused by their circular migration to and from the city every year. And so this phenomena is an example of planetary urbanization. But what exactly is planetary urbanization? In brief, planetary urbanization is a theory in the urban studies that describe how when cities get more developed, they expand their influence outwards into the rural. So urban processes and influence will penetrate like the rural areas of the world, eventually to the point where the entire planet gets urbanized. So when this happens, the distinction between the rural and the urban as separate categories will get blurred, and this results in like a need to redefine the field of urban studies. So how exactly does the seasonal Tibetan sweater trade link to planetary urbanization? So firstly, when people migrate for work, the main goal is usually to remit money back home. But over here, that's not the only thing that gets remitted. So something I call urban remittances also gets remitted from the cities to the rural and closed off Tibetan refugee settlements. So these urban remittances are like the urban practices, norms, beliefs, and culture that the trader gets influenced by after living in the city for 4 months every year. And they will bring these practices, norms, beliefs, and culture back home with them to the Tibetan settlements. So as the cycle happens every year, these influences will gradually like transform the rural settlements. So given that the settlement camps were originally designed to be self-sustaining and quite close communities, uh, this like these urban remittances wouldn't really have happened if not for like the mass seasonal migration of the sweater business. And yeah, so that's all I have for today. If you're interested in knowing more about my research, I'll be happy to send you my paper as well. Thank you.
Great, Bob. Well done. Thank you.
Sharing my screen.
Yeah, you can keep sharing your screen. I'm just looking at what am I can until so now we can open it up, please, to questions. So you've got an intimate audience here. It's more like a think tank than a public presentation. So would anybody like to ask Bob a question?
Okay.
Yeah.
So Bob, I know your focus and target group are mainly on India and Tibetan society, but I was curious if you managed to find any relation or connection to the Himalayan people or like Tibetan diaspora who are living in Nepal. So what are some kind of relationship that you find from your study?
So yeah, I focus mainly on the Tibetan sweater sellers in India itself because I felt like if I were to expand ours towards like the settlements in Nepal or other parts of Himalayas, it would be a bit too broad. Yeah, because I'm really covering quite a lot of like themes and theories within this study itself. So if and it's quite specific to the Indian society, like this practice. So like if I expand it out towards Nepal, then it will be quite different. And maybe in the future, like for future research, it could be useful to do a comparative study. But for this study, I focus more on the Indian society.
For Pema's for Pema's question, I would like to add up one thing. Because Bob, you can also share your experience since you have interviewed one Mustangi lady who used to go work for seasonal to help the Tibetan people. So you can also share those examples. I think you have taken interview from her.
Which interviewee are you referring to?
Rinzin. She's from Mustang.
Oh,
Have
okay.
you taken? Yeah.
So most of my interviewees that I use, the interviews I use for my research is from in India itself. And although I talked to a few people outside of just for more like broad context, but yeah, it's really quite focused on the Indian society. But as for like the interviews outside of India, I talked to someone who used to be in the sweater business, but she has migrated to France now. So she is currently living and working in France. And so from there, I can kind of get like I was able to get like the perspective of someone who has already migrated to somewhere else and who's out of the sweater business. And but she still feels that like the sweater business is still very important for the Tibetan community in India itself, even though she is no longer in it, or even though she has already migrated, because on the whole, the business was able to like uplift a lot of Tibetans living in India, their standards of living and the standards of development in their settlements.
I have a question, Bob. Did anyone who you talked to or any of your interviews talk about this, like the shift away from farming in the settlements in the South?
Yes. So originally when from my interviews, I think most of them came to a consensus that like at the beginning when the first generation of like Tibetan refugees settled in India, like they were mostly based in like farming or like subsistence-based industries within the settlement camps itself. But when like this group of entrepreneurial Tibetans started like selling sweaters from village to village, then this trade sort of evolved into something that is practiced by almost everyone, all Tibetans in India. So at the beginning, in probably the 1950s and 60s, it was quite centered around farming. And now, and between the 60s to the present, like the sweater business is a huge source of income for most Tibetans. But like, so what I found is that they usually practice this on a household level. So not all members of the household will go to the sweater business. So some will stay in the settlements to do farming, and while others will go out for the sweater business. So they kind of like diversify the risk of kind of like not having all their eggs in one basket. So they have sources of income in different industries.
I have one question, please. Since the suppliers are usually Sikh or at least Indian in general, how come you think that no enterprising businessman has tried to take over from Tibetans.
Tibetan businessman. Oh.
No, Indian
Indian.
businessman. If there's such a profitable thing. Any idea?
So from what I understand, like this trade has become like quite normalized over the decades because it's been taking place for every year over the decades, and so it's kind of like there's kind of like an ecosystem in place where the Tibetans will get the supplies from the Indian wholesalers, and they will set up the markets. And from what I know from my interviews, there are like some competition that's coming up. I mean, like competition has been increasing over the years, but they still kind of hold a niche in this market because of like how normalized it is. So like when you go to these cities and you ask a cab driver, where can I go to buy winter jackets or sweaters, then most of the time they'll just bring you straight to the Tibetan supermarkets because it's already like kind of a norm, and it's so it's already like kind of a fixed norm that if you want winter clothing in these cities, you go to Tibetan supermarkets. And so over the years, I guess they do have to like compete with the local Indian market, but I guess because it's already been so established, so like they still hold that niche in the market. Mm.
Okay, great.
Bob, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
Yes, please, Dechala, go for it.
Okay, so I'm curious to know like how Indian Tibetan follow all the procedure to have a proper permission from the particular state to have a business, because since most of the Tibetans have to migrate to another state, right, to do their business, right? So I'm just curious to know how they follow all the procedure to have a permission from the Indian government.
Okay. So in each marketplace is basically run by this association or committee. So this committee of traders is like they're elected into their roles by the marketplace itself, and I think they change the roles every 2 years or so. So at the beginning, around August every year, the committee will send maybe a few people from the committee to the cities itself to talk to the local government, and so they usually have to pay a bit of fees, and the government will allow them to, will grant them the permit to set up the marketplace for the season. And so like the exact procedure of it is like at the beginning, I was told by my interviewees that at the beginning, when the pioneers were starting this whole sweater trade, that was the most difficult part because they have to like talk to the government, and they have to start from scratch and ground up, and like there was no precedence before that of how the sweater market would be run. So like in the present now, if they were to go to a local government, it would be quite easy to get. There's already like the precedence of it for the past few decades. So at the beginning, I'm not exactly sure how exactly they negotiated for the permits or to set up a market, but from what I know, they, like the pioneers of this business, they talk to the government and they really push for them to be allowed to set up the marketplaces. So most of the difficulty came in the beginning, probably in the 1980s or 60s. But in the present day, it's quite simple process. Yeah, you just go to the government, and yeah, they should be able to negotiate for the permit quite easily.
So do they have any committee member among themselves to initiate those things?
Yeah, so each marketplace is run by a committee that's self-elected by the traders. So like every 2 years, they will re-elect who is the leaders of this marketplace. And I think like from each village, there'll be a few representatives to be in the committee. So like they are represented like each different settlement is represented in the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, fantastic, Bob. So we don't want to move on, but time's, you know, winged chariot. So well done, Bob. Fantastic. Our first ever Zoom presentation. Yeah, thank you very much. And well done on doing this work. And okay, Ngawang Tenzin, you're in charge now.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Over to you.
Can you guys see it? Can you guys see it? Okay. So my ISP, I'm going to talk about the 4 Tibetan settlements in Pokhara, then and now, and their livelihood strategies and the involvement of women in the administrative works and settlement offices. So this project basically talks about the 4 main Tibetan settlements in Pokhara and what were the income sources back in the days when the settlement was first established versus the income at present, and what were the involvement of women in those administrative works and development works in the society itself. So when I did this research, I particularly interviewed with the settlement officers and then the working women in the different settlement offices, and then the elderly people of different 4 settlements. So basically my questions to the settlement officer and the working women were, what were the main income source back in the days, and what is the main income source right now, and what is the involvement of women back in the days in the administrative work, and what is the involvement of women at present, and whether the involvement of the women has increased or decreased, or what is the reason behind that. And I also did a brief history about an elderly woman of her journey from Tibet to Pokhara. And I also did a brief check-in about a welfare organization under which 2 of the settlements fall under. So the first is my settlement, Tashipalkal Tibetan settlement. So it is located in Hemja. And yeah, so this is basically the picture of our settlement. And so it was established at 1963 AD. And the first income source when the settlement was established was like the people of this settlement used to do work at road construction site and hard labor like portering and carrying loads of the tourists and taking them to places. Later on, when a small amount of money was collected from those daily wages of the people, so they made a small corporation called Nyamle in Tibetan, which is called Nyamle. And so from there, they got a little bit of budget, and then they established a carpet manufacturing factory sort of thing. So from when the carpet manufacturing factory was established, so from there, that was the moment when it was the main source of income for all of the settlement people. So like the males would go to go out and do the hard labor like portering and everything, and the women were involved in carpet weaving and everything else. And right now, the present income source of this settlement is mainly from the seasonal souvenir business in like Ladakh, Lakeside, those tourist area. People go and sell their souvenirs. Talking about the involvement of women, it was basically at past involvement of women in these administrative works were there, but they were not too much. But at present, the involvement of women has increased, mainly because due to the women getting more educated and time changing, and the mentality of people also changed. So that why, and the gender equality and everything worked in, and the involvement of women has also increased in this settlement. Okay, what happened now? Oops. Okay, now it's checked. Wait.
Well, Pamela, Ngawang Tenzin, we had your next slide, but now it's gone back. Have you lost connection, or are you?
Is it showing the next slide?
It did, but then now it just went back again.
No, because I'm tapping the same thing, but it's not showing. It's just.
Oh, yeah. Well, there you go. It's there. It's showing for us.
Yeah. So okay, this was the second slide, but this is another one of slides. So I'll talk about this anyway. So this is Tashling Tibetan settlement, which is located at Chorepatan. This settlement was established at 1964. As you can see, the total population there. And when I interviewed the settlement officer of this settlement, he particularly said that this Tashling settlement is the most developed among the 4 different Tibetan settlements in Pokhara. And when I asked the reason, he said that because of the infrastructure, as you can see, the houses in this settlement are mostly cemented, whereas the settlement houses of other 4 different settlements are mostly made out of tins. And also because of the people involved in different sort of business, like cafes, they're running cafes, some of them are running game houses, and some of them have restaurants and everything. So the people of this settlement and the settlement itself is more developed than the other 3 settlements. The women involvement in this settlement was a little bit lower than the Tashipelka settlement in the past, but there were some few ladies who were working in the settlement offices and administrative works. But as of right now, the involvement of women has increased due to the same reasons, like education and change in mentality and everything else. And the present income is generated from different businesses like cafes, restaurants, and souvenir business as well. So this is Pelgerling Tibetan settlement, which is located at the heart of Pokhara city, which is near Prithvi Chowk. This settlement is the smallest settlement in amongst the 4 different Tibetan settlements, according to the size and the population itself. This settlement, as you can see, was established in 1974. So this settlement, regards to the other 2 settlements, was established like a 10-year later. It was because this settlement includes mainly the people who were involved in the guerrilla fighter army, those who were involved in the fight against China in Mustang. So when they were going on war with the Chinese, the other 2 settlements were already established, but they were in Mustang and were doing the war with the Chinese. So when His Holiness Dalai Lama conveyed the message that they should drop their guns and shouldn't do violence and should follow the rules and everything else, when they gave up the war and when they moved back, after that this settlement was established. So you can see the establishment date is sort of like a gap. There is a gap of 10 years. This settlement actually falls under a Lodrik Welfare Fund or Lodrik Welfare Association. The main source of income back in the days of this settlement was also similar to the other 2. And as of right now, the main income source is from the restaurants and the souvenir business, which are funded by INGOs, international INGOs, and the PRM, which is the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. When I interviewed the settlement officer of this settlement, he said that Pelgerling Tibetan settlement and Champaling Tibetan settlement, which I'm going to show about, are the 2 settlements which are just lagging behind the other 2, or just kind of stranded and less developed because of the gap between those 10 years of gap between the establishment. So the Pelgerling Tibetan settlement and Champaling Tibetan settlements are less developed or a little bit stranded than the rest 2 settlements. So the next is Champaling Tibetan settlement. Champaling Tibetan settlement was established at 1975. It is located at Dulegaonda, which lies on the Pokhara to Kathmandu highway. It also comes under the Lodrik Welfare Association. As you can see in the picture, it says Pokhara Lodrik Champaling Tibetan settlement. The settlement officer of this settlement was same as the Pelgerling Tibetan settlement officer. So he acts as the settlement officer of both of these two settlements. And the main income source back in the day was also working at road construction site and mostly wool yearning. And the people that time would take wool on credit from Kathmandu, and they would yearn the wool and sell it, give it back to Kathmandu, and then they would earn a little bit of money. And from there, when they saved some money, they established a carpet factory and everything else. The present income generation generated is from the restaurants near the highways and from the agriculture farming, which is funded by the USAID, and some souvenir seasonal business. Yeah, so this is Lodri Welfare Association, what organization does. Back in the days, this main objective was to serve the Lodri people and its descendants, but now it has expanded its role and it serves other Tibetan peoples and helps other Tibetan people as well. So yeah, this is my references. Thank you. That's it.
Okay.
I'm sorry that a bit of lagging behind because this computer is not working.
Yeah,
so I have to
yeah, don't worry, Ngawang La, it's great. And so you did miss out one slide, did you? The second one?
Yeah, but this is not. Yeah, I think you're talking about this. I had the conclusion written off. This one right here.
Okay, that was the one that you were. Okay, anyway, it's great, Ngawang La. Now, if you could give your hosting ability back to Himala, then he can do what he has to do. So, and now questions, please, for Ngawang La.
I'm sorry, Ngawang, but I did read your work before, so I'm very happy I have it. Thank you for the presentation. I'm sorry to miss it.
No, it's fine.
You can watch it, Nazneen and Huba, on the video, yeah.
Yeah, and I can also send you the ISP as well. Yeah, email you.
They've already read, I think, you've had the presentation. We've all got all the ISPs, Ngawang La. Yeah.
Students of
Can I ask one question?
Yes, please.
Unfortunately, I can't attend your presentation, so sorry for that. But then I have a bit idea about how the Tibetan settlement looks and all. So on that base, I would like to ask one question. So the question is that, have you seen any difference between like your mother generation and yours generation? I mean, in terms of good sense, like.
In terms of.
Like in terms of their confidence, education, and all.
Oh yeah.
Like in terms of better side, not the worst side. Like normally if I give you our community example, like most of the like aunties are like they are not that much open, and then they have to be within their own community, and then they are not able to like expose more, so they believe whatever like higher people says, so like that, like do you have any sort of experience, and do you know something like that, and would you like to share us on that?
Okay. So when I was doing my interviews with the elderly people of this settlement, of my settlement, the elderly, those were more focused on the education and the benefits of education. So they would always say that when I asked that why is the ratio of the women involvement has increased in this settlement, and they would always say it's obvious because it's just because of the education. They would always point out that education is the main important. So I think that sense where education is now at this time very much important for everything has changed. Besides that, their own cultural things, wearing chupas and everything else has still been going on in our settlement as well. But the thinking that yes, now the education is very important in this time has changed in our settlement. I haven't asked those in other settlement because I wasn't able to do the face-to-face interviews. So I did on verbal. But in our settlement, yes, the mentality of the elderly people has changed to somewhat, including the education itself, but their own cultural thoughts that women should wear traditional dress and everything else is still there.
Yes. Yeah, so maybe education in terms of like if student wants to dance also, this is also kind of education. I think they also support such kind of things, right?
Yes, yes, they do.
Okay, that's a good sign. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So you mentioned like this increase in education over the years, right? So do you find like this has caused an increasing like out migration from the settlements? So like, do you find like the current generation and future generations are wanting to move out of the settlements more? And if yes, where are they going, and what are the implications of this?
Okay. So what I found out in our settlement, there is not much of this migration due to the education, but in the other three settlements, since Nashiling and Peljoling and Champaling, those two, the Champaling and Peljoling are a little bit stranded and less developed. So the young people or the children prefer to go to the India for further education. Like if they were to study medicine or like Tibetan medicine or and do nurse courses or everything, they go to India, and they go mostly to Delhi. And some of them, if they want to study Tibetan medicine, then they go to Dharamsala. In our settlement, yeah, in our settlement, there is not much. There is, but in context to the other three, there is lesser people migrating to other country or India for better education or anything, because we have high schools and everything in our settlement near, so they prefer here. But in the other three settlements, yes, youngster and people go to India, mainly in Dharamsala and Delhi, to do nurse courses and study Tibetan herbal medicine and everything else.
So I noticed like most of the like once they graduate from nurse, so most of the like young ladies used to stay in India itself. So do you know why the reason of this? Would you like to explain about it?
I think it's just because of the
Don't you
job.
think it's because of license? Since in Nepal they are not getting license,
That can
nurse
be.
license
That
and
is
all.
the reason. Yeah, the license do not work, and plus the job opportunities and the salary and everything also plays an important role in that.
I have a small question.
Nazneen, it says you're connected with two things. Yeah.
Yes, I am. Because it's, the sound is not working on the laptop properly. Okay.
Maybe you can fix the sound on the laptop.
Very quickly, I want a sense, if you got Ngawang, of marriage and relationships between young people.
Marriage and the relationship between young people?
Yeah.
You mean like the acceptance of people or what?
Yeah.
Acceptance, I think there is still a bit of people hesitating for like an open relationship where it's too much common in abroad. But once they get engaged, then if they try to live in or stay in a particular house, I think that's more common. But if there is no such things as engagement or anything else, there's very less chance that people will not talk about one who is in an open relationship and staying together. I think that's more of an unusual thing in our community as well.
Yeah, I was also thinking about mixed marriages. Do you have a sense, because women are going out to study, become nurses, are they meeting other men from outside their own communities? Is that happening? I'm just curious.
Particularly with women's working out or for study. I haven't seen anyone who is studying and come back and had like a relationship or like marriage with some different guy. I haven't seen that, but maybe there is, because I haven't seen that in our settlement. But there are few people who has married Nepali women and are living a happy life, and is in our settlement as well. There are 3 or 4 families.
Thank you.
Yeah, thumbs up. Okay, great. Ngawang La, it's fantastic. I think we just need to keep going, Ngawang La, but well done. And YC.
Sorry for the lagging.
Huh?
Sorry for the
No,
computer.
no, Ngawang La, there's no sorry. No, it's great. It's all worked perfectly from our end. Exactly. There's some issues. So YC is the one we've all been waiting for.
Yeah.
Thank you, YC. Over to you, I hope.
So can you see my PowerPoint?
Yeah,
okay.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So the topic of my ISP is Monastic Yundrung Bon in Eastern Tibet, continuity and discontinuity from its Zhangzhung predecessors. So Zhangzhung was a pre-Buddhist polity around 100 BCE to 600 CE, with its capital located in the westernmost Tibet, in today's Mari region. And the primary religion associated with Zhangzhung is Bon. This religion was believed to dominate the cultural and religious life of Tibetans before the introduction of Buddhism. And there are 2 types of Bon. The first, as the earlier type, was a category, is a generic name for the religious practices found in Asian cultures on the plateau. And the second is known as Yundrung Bon, which is a more recent form of Bon, established by a Zhangzhung prince whose name is Tomba Shinrok. And in this Yundrung Bon tradition, Tomba Shinrok reorganized practices from Asian Bon forms into a more systematic religion. And throughout history, Yundrung Bon has also adopted many Buddhist teachings into its own ideology for its survivance. So this paper focuses on how Bon is practiced in current Tibetan society as compared to Buddhism as the dominant religion in most regions of the plateau. Mainly the paper, the research reflects Bonpo practices in monastic settings. In contemporary Tibet, Bonpos also rely on monasteries as their authoritative institutions, similar to their Buddhist counterparts, and through monastery visits in 2 eastern Tibetan cities, Lhasa and Ningchi, this paper aims to show how Yundrung Bon today are in many ways in communication with Buddhism and while keeping its essentials from Zhangzhung period. So in this presentation, I'll focus on one Bonpo monastery that I found the most representative. The name of the monastery is Takze and is located in Takze village in Ningchi. So to enter the monastery, I actually visit the place twice. At the first time, I was told that the monks all went outside for a ritual outside the village, so the monastery was locked. Then I came back next day after I visited all the other Bonpo monasteries nearby. So this is actually the last monastery I visited in my trip. So according to the Lama, whose name is Kesan Nima, the monastery is dedicated to a deity called Nampa Gyawa. So he is a manifestation of Tomba Shinrok, the founder of Yundrung Bon, and in the main temple of the monastery, you will see the statue of Nampa Gyawa in the middle, who's sitting in his iconic posture with the right hand raised above his shoulder. And on both sides of the principal deity, you'll then see 5 almost identical deities in different colors. So in Bon, these 5 deities belong to a single category, and each one stands for one cardinal direction. The one in the middle, so the white one, is called Kunang Kyapa in his Tibetan name, and the one associated with the eastern direction on the right is called Sawa Rongjong, and the one of the north called Gawa Dongdrop, the one of the west called Jeta Kome, and the one of the north, the green one, is called Gyaha Garchuk. So these deities in Bon are all related to wisdom of various aspects. And in Buddhism, we also have a similar 5 Buddha family associated with cardinal directions. And they are known as the Dhyani Buddha, which is a group of self-born celestials from the beginning of time. And they are also depicted in 5 colors, as in their Bonpo iconographies. But they have different names in Sanskrit, and another difference can be found in their iconography as well. So for the 5 deities in Bon, they are usually depicted as embracing their consort in the front. But for their Buddhist iconography, they are all depicted in an independent form. So these are some of the deities you'll find on the first floor of the main temple, a mixture of both Bonpo and Buddhist presence. And then on the second floor of the main temple, we have statue of 3 Lama from Zhangzhung. So the one on the left, his name is Tongyong Tuchen. He's a Bonpo sage from Zhangzhung, and his whole body is usually in red, holding a flame of fire on his right hand. But in this image, we see a trident instead. So his iconography can sometimes has variances as well. And in the middle, we have the statue of Dramba Namkha, who have different biographies in the 2 traditions. So in Bon, he was an important sage who saved the religion from the assimilation of Buddhism. But in Buddhism, he was a Bonpo convert who later followed the Nyingma sect of the Nyingma school of Padmasambhava. And on the right, we have Ngawang Tenzin, who is one of the sons of Dramba Namkha, and he's also a famous sage from Zhangzhung, and he's usually associated with longevity. And another son of Dramba Namkha was called Bema Tongzhong in Bon, who is not in the shrine room, but some people also consider Dramba Tongzhong to be the same figure of Padmasambhava, who is the central figure of Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism. But according to Kesa Nyingma Lama of Takje, the most powerful part of the monastery is actually a small shrine room outside the main temple. So the room is on the 2nd floor in the same building of the monks' residence. So taking pictures was not allowed in that monastery, so I just found all these images online to try to recreate the space for you. So the entire shrine room is dedicated to Tumba Shinra, as you can find 2 major shrines for his manifestation Namhagawa on both sides of the room. And on the shelf behind the shrines, there are around 10 small statues of Tumba Shinra in various forms. And besides the statues, there were also old drums, Tanka paintings, and some Bonpo texts, which was said to have been stored in the monastery for at least hundreds of years. So from the first floor to the 2nd floor of the main temple and then to the independent shrine room, we find a decreasing Buddhist presence with more and more Bonpo elements, especially those from pre-Buddhist times. And the most powerful part of this Yundrung Bonpo monastery is still the sacred space dedicated to its founder. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you.
Great, well done, YC. You kept to the time and the number of slides. And so questions for YC, please.
Does YC have any idea how I can stop being jealous of her?
Oh. Yeah, like the entire trip is actually very smooth and turned out as planned, so I was really lucky.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit how many hours of driving, how you got how you got from here to there, how far? Do you have a panoramic picture or if not, that's fine, but give us a picture in words of what the landscape was like, who you talked to, that kind of thing. Thanks.
You mean the landscape of the monastery?
No, I mean your trip, your travels.
Okay, so I went from my home in Nanjing by train to Lhasa, so that took about 2 days, so it's like 44 hours. Yeah. And I stayed in Lhasa for 3 days. So in Lhasa, I visited 2 Bonpo sites, as there are not many Bonpo sites in Lhasa for their strong Buddhist presence there. And after Lhasa, I went to Ningxi for another 4 days. And there, those Bonpo monasteries in Ningxi are usually in the mountains, in the village. So I lived in a county called Ba Yi, and that's where the Holy Bonpo Mountain is located. Yeah. But the monasteries are not very far from each other, so I finished visiting all of them in 2 days.
And very quickly, can you tell us a little bit, if someone is not expert but is still a little observant, what would they notice different between a Bonpo monastery and a Nyingma Kagyu Tibetan Buddhist monastery? Can you talk about that?
I guess like at the entrance of any Bonpo monastery, there are usually the Yundrung sign, like the sign on the slides on the black canvas. Wait, let me try this. So you can see the mouse, this one. So this is like one iconic symbol of Bonpo monasteries here. Yeah. And besides that, actually from the appearance, I guess common people cannot really tell like a lot of differences between Bonpo monastery and today's Buddhist monasteries. And some people, like some Lama of the monasteries I visited, they actually consider Bon as one school of Tibetan Buddhism, like parallel to Nyingma and Sakya, and yeah.
Is Bon still actively practiced by anyone or anywhere in the world today?
Yeah, so people who usually go to these Bonpo monasteries are first Bonpo practitioners from local area and beyond, and then mainly they are local like villagers.
Okay, great, YC. So if we've got no more questions, and I think we obviously had some teething problems just in the logistics, and the timing is perhaps a bit tight, but we'll see how we go moving forward. I think it can work. We just run over a bit often. Oops, wait. So it's just sorry. So well done everybody today. Thank you very much.